This is the Inter-Tech IT-3503 Airstream. It is one of the cases I was most looking for this year. It has some amazing stuff going on, but unfortunately I'm not really that into it. It has potential, don't get me wrong, but some things need to be slightly changed in here or even a lot changed. And some things are just flat out weird. But before we spoil anything, let's go over all of the features. Inter-Tech's newest Airstream comes in the usual budget-friendly brown box, including some free styrofoam and a choking bag. Standing on the table, it is certainly on the smaller side of mid-tower cases, 495mm high to 10mm wide and 395mm deep. With that in mind, supported motherboard form factors are just flat out weird. Mini ITX, micro ATX and regular ATX, all of which are making perfect sense. But eATX is also supported, which, okay, that's great and all, but that thing will basically be floored against the front panel, which, okay. No jokes aside, it just wouldn't make any sense in here. You will lose the cable holes for the 24-pin, which would then require you to somehow route them differently. All of that would make zero sense, so if you're starting to play with eATX boards, just get a higher tier case. That's just how it is. But it's kinda cool that they allow you to do this. On the CPU and GPU side, it starts getting really close to sparse territory. On spec sheet. For the CPU cooler, we can go with up to 165mm high coolers. Things like the Nokia NH-U12A do fit, but for bigger blocks like a D15, don't expect that one to fit in combination with appropriate RAM. But an U12A, a Darkrock Pro 4, these types of coolers will fit in. For GPUs on the other hand, it's up to 310mm, according to Inter-Tech. A statement my 320mm Zotac 3080 Ti doesn't particularly believe. And fun fact, if you're willing to install the card slightly tilted and then tilt it back again once it's in, you can also install one of those enormous Gainwatt 4080 Phantoms, like the one we have in here. Like the case is 95% GPU, it's great. So yeah, 310 was a really bad estimate. You can go with up to 330mm long cards if you really want to. So this thing is kinda next-gen GPU ready, something that they just forgot to mention on the spec sheet. Though not the vertical mounting option. Sure, we can do vertical mounts with a bring your own PCIe riser approach, but you are going to be completely squished against the glass, which really isn't ideal, and B, it's 2-slot. So everything out right now, which is like RTX 4000, just won't work. And C, the whole PCIe mounting thing feels ridiculously cheap considering that the case made an overall good impression. It's just weird. It stands on pretty high feet, creating slightly over 2 cm of breathing space. The front mesh doesn't feel cheap at all, and the overall metal and tempered glass side panel, which seems to be 4mm thick, does feel pretty robust. But then, all of the PCIe slots, except for the first one, are breakout only, which is A, annoying as hell, and B, it feels good, but then breakout PCIe slots, which... As far as drives in general are concerned, we can install up to one 3.5-inch or three 2.5-inch drives. Two of these SSDs can be mounted onto this plate behind the motherboard, and the drive cage in the bottom compartment can fit one 3.5-inch inside of it and another 2.5-inch on top. The power supply would be installed behind that cage and can be up to somewhat around 200mm long, but thankfully we can just remove the hard drive cage by unscrewing it in the bottom, making the PSU support as long as the case itself. Unfortunately, the PSU got one of those glory holes, which, when are they finally stop making these? It looks hideous. And now coming to the most important aspect and the reason why I was so excited about the Airstream. Those two 200mm fans. The relatively meshy front filter hides two of those enormous ARGB fans that are pulling enormous amounts of air into the case. Now looking at the spec sheet, manual and whatnot, they are 200mm fans. That's it. Nobody says anything about them. However, thanks to my little measuring thingy, I know that they are spinning at about 700 RPM, which does make a lot of sense considering their size. Like, those types of fans are spinning that quick, and touching them does feel like 700 RPM are hitting my finger. The problem is, they are useless. Let's start with the first point. They are 3-pin voltage controlled, which sucks, but you deal with it. If your motherboard doesn't do it by yourself, set the PWM port to voltage control and there you go. The problem is that there is this ARGB and fan controller in the back of the case to which the fans are connected by default. This thing takes its own signal, which you can then switch by pressing the RGB button, or you can pass through some signal from your software. That's not the problem. SATA power is also a nice touch, considering that Inter-Tech was still running on Molex like a week ago. No, the problem is what is not here. And what is not here is pass-through PWM or 3-pin signal for fan speed. So what will happen to anybody who's using this out of the box is that they will just spin at 100% all the freaking time, which isn't really such a bad thing. It can be not so bad if the fans are unhearable, but those are not. They are hearable. They are not loud in that sense, really not. I would compare them to, for example, Nokia NF-S12Bs at full speed. Really not that loud, but you can hear them 24/7 and you can't let them idle at, 300 RPM. They are just on crack 24/7. It's why did they do this? But okay, the issue is still solvable. Just deconnect them and then run them straight to the motherboard. Yay! Problem solved. No. What Inter-Tech very unfortunately did here is use a random ass chassis which wasn't designed for 200mm fans and then slap 200mm fans on top. The result is that anything above 140mm form factor will just be blocked by metal. Congratulations, you achieved nothing. Sure, the top and bottom of each fan will be able to somehow work, but that would also be achievable by a triple 120mm setup, so it is just dumb. I was so much looking forward to finally have a native 200mm case. I have those Nokias here, those 200mm Nokia fans waiting for months, and I can still not install them into anything because in here it just wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, we are still not done. Let's say you want to go the max performance route because 200mm fans in here are just stupid. Well, the front panel has cutouts that are specifically made for 200mm fans. So two possibilities. It will either not perform as well as it could or should because there would be partial obstruction, and B, it would look incredibly stupid. So no, the front part of this thing is incredibly bad design. Nothing about this makes sense, and even if you were to install two 140s or three 120s, because you still can, it still would be a shot in the knee. And what bothers me the most, apart from the front, is that the case is pretty well designed overall. The top, including the magnetic dust filter, can fit another two 120s or 140s or an up to 280 radiator. But the well-designed part of this is the fact that it is built in a way that, for example, Silverstone SharkForce 160mm fans will still fit in and not be obstructed by any metal. Which, they did it right in the top, but then they f*** up the front. Oh, and the back can also house another 120mm, which is just standard. But the bottom got some extra tricks up its sleeves too. The relatively cheap dust filter in the very bottom of the case spans for the whole case length. Then there are perforation holes all across the bottom of the case and even below and on top of the drive cage. And then to make it somewhat useful, we got a shit ton of perforation holes on top of the PSU shroud, including 120mm fan holes usable with regular radiator screws. So what you can do is slap another two 120s right here. Sure, the one on top of the PSU wouldn't do much because there is not a lot of space, but the other one would do a lot, and given how GPUs nowadays work, it would truly help to, push some air into that. So it's like they did everything so well, and then they screwed up the front to the point where it just doesn't make any sense anymore. But let's get to the last point that they did particularly well, the I/O. USB 3.0 Type A, USB 3.1 Type C, two USB 2.0 Type A's, mic in and out, accompanied by a OK start button and an ARGB button, which is absolutely impossible to click for me because of my freaking sausage fingers. Thanks for the confidence boost. The case as a whole is just unfortunate. The idea was great. I love that we are still getting some big fan cases over the year, but in here it just doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. They knew that this doesn't work. Why bother? The fans are by default uncontrollable and clearly hearable by default, which is just okay, but still you can ignore the controller. better, but then there is enough obstruction to make it plain unnecessary to use 200mm fans, which then, alright, exchange them for 120s, but then we are back at the front is looking stupid or not performing as well as it should, so it's a waterfall of issues which you can just never solve. Adding to that, this thing will set you back about like 75 euros as of writing the script, and given that the feature that was pushing the price so much just doesn't work, I just don't see this thing as being justifiable. So unfortunate. So many things were done right in here. Relatively good cable management, considering the price point and the overall like the tier of the case. It is accessible, rubber around the central hole, GPU hole, 2.5mm space in the back, good I/O, relatively good quality, but the front ends alone make it stupid. Which is funny, because the case's overall performance isn't really that bad. Like, it works fine, but it's just unfortunate. You will see more numbers in the build, but the fact alone that this is crippling the front fans just makes it unrecommendable for me. This would be like getting a overall good car, but the clutch is never fully released. Like, it always has a slight contact. Good luck. So no, although I am okay with the case as a whole, the fact that the front fan situation is so badly designed, I do not recommend the case, and I do hope that Inter-Tech redesigns this thing with actual 200mm mounts in the front. It's okay to annihilate 120 and 140mm fan support if you get good 200mm support in return. Like, that would make a lot of sense. But okay, this should be it for today's video about the Airstream. At this point, a huge thank you to Inter-Tech for providing us the case, although it didn't turn out that well. But if you want to continue watching, have a look at our take on the Montech Sky 2, a beautiful thing. On a side note, we also have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is in the description below. Anyway, thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.